Thank you, Daniel. This is truly one of the gifts of this past year that we have been able to incorporate Daniel into our service. And I love, it's been a year, a year ago today that we had our last live service. But I love that Daniel reminded us today that we are not giving up hope. Why give up hope? There is always hope. And I am holding on to the hope that we will soon be able to open our doors again, friends. So today we are continuing on in our Lenten series in which we are taking a look at the healing stories of Jesus throughout the Gospel of Matthew. And as I began this series, I shared with you the idea from the Jewish perspective, that third creation story, that God placed not God within a container. The light was placed in there. That container could not hold that light. It shattered into infinite pieces, and that as those shatters have fallen to the earth, it is our job to collect those pieces of divine light together and to contain them within ourselves, and in the process to create a container of light for all of humanity. And that we do this as we join with one another in this place of a tikkun olam, sharing mitzvahs together, doing good for one another. And so that is the objective behind remembering that we are each here as this shard of light in our beach glass, and that we are coming to find our own light so that we can shine our light and heal the world. So as I've been doing, I am going to share a healing story with you today. This one again comes from the Gospel of Matthew. This is chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. And right before this passage begins, Jesus has just talked about that you cannot place new wine into old wineskins, that new wine must be placed into new wineskins, skins that can expand, that aren't dry and brittle. And it reminds us that we too must have that open mind to allow new ideas to enter in, new beliefs to grow us and expand us. And it is that, what he was saying, that leads into this passage. So, while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch this cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, "Go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by her hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all that region. And this is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. So I want to share with you a little bit about what I've been thinking about those healing stories. And I want to start with how interesting it is how these two stories are together. The story of the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years and the story of the synagogue leader who comes and asks for healing. Both of these stories are intricately combined together here, and there's a reason. You'll recall that I talked about through this series the idea in Jewish tradition of those purity laws. Those purity laws that required, for example, those spiritual leaders before entering into temple to be clean. And there were specific laws around that. Remember, I mentioned with the story of the Good Samaritan that the priest who passed by that body laying in the road would not touch that body because it would make them unclean, and they were on their way to synagogue. And in order to then be made clean again, they would have had to go through a whole ritual. So rather than doing that, they ignored that body on the road. This woman who has been bleeding for 12 years is considered unclean. For 12 years, she's been considered unclean. That means that she was ostracized by society. She had to live on the outskirts of that society. Imagine this, for 12 years. Now, Jesus is on his way, remember, to the house of a synagogue leader who believes in these purity laws. And Jesus, by simply touching this woman or having this woman touch him, would have been made unclean. Remember, this begins with the story of the wineskins and the need to expand and open to new understanding. And so Jesus, rather than getting upset with this woman that she has just touched him and now made him unclean, notices her and tells her she is healed and that her own faith has made her whole. That it wasn't anything that Jesus did, it was her faith that said, if I touch the Christ here, I will be made whole. And she's made whole. Jesus isn't concerned about now he's been made unclean and now he's going to this next house. He knows. It isn't that she's been bleeding that makes anybody unclean. Within the letters from Paul, we begin to hear that idea that it's not what happens without us from the outside that makes us unclean. It's not what we put in our mouth. It's what comes out from within us that makes us unclean. Right? When we speak words of discrimination and judgment and victimhood and blame, that creates this sense of being unclean within us, where we forget that we are one with the divine. So Jesus doesn't pause even for a moment to stop and consider that he has been made unclean. He simply goes to the home of that spiritual leader and he tells the crowds to disperse. That young girl is just sleeping. She's not dead. I invite you to think about the areas in our lives where we fall asleep and become lifeless, if you will. We've talked about before people who walk through this world in a state of being dead to the world, without life, without enthusiasm, without joy, simply going through the motions of being alive. And sometimes it takes those people that are noisy in our lives, it takes moving them out, it takes putting out their thoughts and their ideas of who we should be and how we should be. Again, opening up to new ideas, new understanding, growing in our understanding so that we can once more find the life of God that is within us, to resurrect and restore us, to say, rise up. This is what I hear when I read that story. How do you and I close our minds to new ideas? How do we close our mind to new ways of being? Where are we still stuck in what was rather than what can be? One of the things that I've been doing through this series is to relate how in our modern society we see similar kinds of ideas still playing out. And I want to go to that woman who was bleeding for 12 years. Throughout history, women have been outcast from their society during those times when we are menstruating, for example. Now, here in the United States, we are certainly no longer isolated for that, but there are still countries in the world that do still do this. In places like India, certain areas of India, Pakistan, Nepal, when girls and women are menstruating, they're put out of the house. Sometimes they must go and sleep outside in the cold or with the animals, because there is still a belief in those cultures that there is something unclean about women during those times. Now, we don't do that here in the United States. But there is something that we do have here in the United States. It's something you may or may not have heard of. So I'm inviting you to make your mind like a new wineskin open to new ideas. Because here in the United States, what we still deal with is something called period poverty. It's been estimated that there are 42 million women and girls who are in a place of poverty in this country, who cannot afford to purchase the products necessary to go through their monthly menstruation. For the homeless women and girls, for women who are in prison, this continues to be an issue. There is limited access to those kinds of products. And for a study was done of girls in poverty and how they still see this time as a time of shame, a time when they must hide who they are and what they're going through. So while we here have come a long way in evolving our consciousness and in opening up to not excluding, there are still ways that I'm inviting you to be aware that even here, we can see a similarity to what was happening in Jerusalem or in Jesus' time 2,000 years ago. So today we're talking about intellectual health. It's an interesting idea, the idea of intellectual health that I want to separate from what we talked about last week, which was mental health. This is different. This is about the ideas that we hold in our mind. You might have heard the term post-truth. We are living in what is now called a post-truth world. I remember when I first heard that idea, wondering what in the world is a post-truth world. I want to share with you the definition of this. Post-truth, this is from dictionary.com. Post-truth is relating to or existing in an environment in which facts are viewed as irrelevant or less important than personal beliefs and opinions. And emotional appeals are used to influence public opinion. Facts are viewed as irrelevant, and our emotions get to determine what we believe in. In a post-truth world, facts are irrelevant. I don't know about you, but I have had conversations with people that believe this idea that facts are simply ideas that we hold that are based on our own beliefs. In other words, facts are subjective rather than objective. And I can go about and I can find those subjective facts that verify for me what my beliefs are. And as a result, we live in this world where facts have become less and less important. We're ruled by our emotions and where our emotions want to take us. As a result, things like conspiracy theories continue to be supported. In fact, it was shown that with this pandemic over this last year, the belief in conspiracy theories has grown. And it really began back in March and in April when we were all shut down and locked in. Because you see, conspiracy theories grow when there is a place of uncertainty, a place of unknowing, a place where we want to set our feet back on solid ground. And conspiracy theories offers a place for that solid ground to appear beneath our feet. It offers ideas that we can grab hold of, not based in fact, but based on our emotion of fear, of worry, of doubt. Let me have something that I can hold on to like a lifeline to get me through this time. And that's what happened back in March and in April when people were home and locked down and spending probably way too much time on our computers trying to figure things out. And so conspiracy theories like QAnon have grown in this past year. To the point where, the mob that was in the Capitol on January 6th had people that were QAnon adherents, sure that they needed to step in and stop what they saw was happening. So conspiracy theories you could think of as benign. So what if you believe that? But understand that those same theories also have the potential to move us into action that is less than harmonious, less than loving, less than understanding. And recognize how within you and I, it is our discomfort with the mystery that moves us into these kinds of ideas. We are not comfortable with the mystery. We want to know. Intellectual health invites us into the place of the mystery. Intellectual health is supported when we bring our minds with openness and curiosity, but we also remain grounded in reality. So I'm open to new experiences. I'm open to learning new ideas. I'm open to seeing with wonder. I'm open to the mystery. I'm open to the realization that we as humanity know so little. When we look out into the vastness of the universe that is ever expanding, and we recognize the littleness that we are within that, we can know that science cannot account for 95% of what's out there. Science cannot tell us why things happen the way they do out in our universe. There's a mystery there. And I can embrace that mystery with wonder, not needing to fill it in with an idea because I'm uncomfortable with the mystery. That mystery of our body and our consciousness. I shared a few weeks ago that science cannot explain where our consciousness comes from or where our consciousness resides. You know, Unity teaches that life is consciousness. And the consciousness that you have and the consciousness that I have creates our lives, individually and collectively. And science cannot tell us where that consciousness arises from. It's a mystery. And so often where I believe we as humankind get off track, off center, we begin to exclude and other, and is in this place of believing that we know. Believing that I know who and what God is. Believing that I know who or what you are. Believing that I know what life is about. Believing what I believe about religion. Believing to the point that we're willing to argue and fight and exclude and blame and push each other apart because of what we think we know. Jesus said, you cannot put new wine into old wineskins. You must have a new wineskin. You cannot put new ideas into a mind that is brittle and holds only what is known and is unwilling to move from that. Intellectual health invites us into the wonder, into the mystery, into the beauty of the world. Let's go back to that post-truth world for a minute. Because I shared some ways that it can be very destructive when those conspiracy theories are believed in and acted upon. But there are ways that you or I might have also been involved in supporting ideas that are not based in fact, not based in truth. I've shared this one before, but I just recently saw it coming across some posts again. And it's that beautiful image, perhaps you've seen it on your social media pages, of the sunflowers. And the sunflowers are facing one another. And the story goes that when it's cloudy, rather than following the sun as sunflowers do, they turn to one another for the light, to uplift one another. It's a beautiful idea, right? I get it. But it's not true. It's not fact-based. You go watch a sunflower when it's cloudy out and it's still following the light. They don't turn to one another. I get it. We want that story to be true because it supplies us with the emotion that we need to say, see, we can lift one another up. We can be the light for one another. But we're using a story that isn't factual when there is so much factual that can lead us to wonder that doesn't need to be made up. So while that story seems benign, recognize and realize that each time we share it because it's based on our emotion and it's based on supporting where we are adding to that post-truth world. Why not find something really wonderful that is really happening? For example, scientists who have been studying trees have found that trees are in relationship with one another, that through their root systems, they support the root systems of the trees that are around them, that families of trees grow up together. The parents and not the siblings, but the offsprings of those trees. And that they are now learning that trees communicate with one another. Now, this is factual and wonderful. Who knew the trees could communicate, support one another? Because you see, we have it in our mind that a tree is just a tree. We know what a tree is. If I told you to think about a tree, you'd have that image in your mind, and that image in your mind would tell you you know a tree. But what happens if we move out of that place of I know? Allow ourselves to be informed by wonder. Discover that trees too, science is showing this, have a bit of consciousness within them. Now, not consciousness like you and I get that. But consciousness nonetheless. Those divine building blocks of God that are there within that tree, within the flowers, within the sun, within the sky, within one another. I've been listening a lot to Father Richard Rohr, who comes from the Franciscan tradition. And he talks about how in the Franciscan tradition, the first Bible is nature. The second Bible is the words. And that we can discover God within nature as we look out with eyes of wonder, as we open ourselves to new understanding. And so I want to pass this along from Father Rohr, because in a series I was listening to yesterday, he talks about loneliness. And I know that over this past year, so many have experienced a sense of loneliness and the isolation. It's understandable. But Father Rohr also tells us if you can open to the wonder and the mystery, allowing yourself into a deeper experience of God, you will find that you cannot be lonely. You will discover that God is there within it all. You will find your spirit expanding, your heart growing. You will see that God is everywhere. And you will walk through this experience in a much different way. But it requires intellectual curiosity. Can I see this differently? Can I know something different about my God in this life? This is something that continues to require some practice. And I'm going to share with you the practice, but before I do so, I wanted to share with you a couple of statements that I found on the Unity TruthNet site. This is from Where I Am King by Dana Gatlin. It has to do with our thoughts. Dana says this: your mind is your own. It is your own place. You have the absolute say-so as regards to what enters and dwells there. This fact should be a source of renewed strength and joy to you. You are the absolute arbiter. Of course, it will require watchfulness, alertness, fidelity, a sincere desire on your part. Yet it rests with you and with your capacities. You may think you have no power over the conditions that fill your life, the thoughts that fill your mind. Nothing is falser than this belief, which is in itself a destructive weed. You have the power, and you may exercise it in accordance with your desire, purpose, integrity, and perseverance. We have the power to pay attention to what we are allowing to inform our consciousness, what thoughts we are holding. Thoughts based on emotion, or thoughts based on a wonder and an openness and a vulnerability to see the divine within all. So here is our spiritual practice for this week. The words of Jesus that we highlight this week are from the healing story are, "The girl is not dead, but sleeping." We have touched today on our need to rejuvenate our spirit, to awaken with new vigor for curiosity, for creativity. This is the intellectual healing that is a spiritual healing. And so I'm inviting you this week to take time to contemplate the places in your life where you have been asleep. And specifically, where have you and I been asleep to fully embracing and expressing that divine Christ light that is within us, that when we shine that forth will support healing in our world. Imagine that you are living into that truth this week. What would it take? What would you need to release? What would you need to let go of? What would you need to fill up your open mind to fully be and express in your divinity? This is our practice for this week. I'm so grateful for each one of you who continues to let me know how this is going for you. Many of you have said, "I have a healing story I'd like to share with you." I am looking for you to share with me those healing stories. If you have something to share, we can meet in the Zoom room for a couple of minutes and I can record that. These are going to be the stories that we are going to use as our resurrection of the living cross on Easter. So if you have a healing story that you'd like to share, you can find that form through our live stream page or our Sunday service page. And as we've been doing, I invite you to your stone again, to recognizing how you, like this piece of beach glass, may be tumbled and tossed through the circumstances of life, but that something beautiful is coming from that. Something beautiful is already present here. But something beautiful is that Christ's light shining so perfectly as you. And if you have one of our Zen gardens, to place your stone and contemplate that this week. Contemplation is the way that we move into this place of wonder, of oneness, of union with the divine. And there we will experience our true healing and transformation. Thank you, and God bless.